a night like no other. Angela Carter stepped out of her sleek black car, her heels clicking softly against the pavement as she approached the grand entrance of the Elysian Table, one of the most luxurious restaurants in her portfolio. Clad in a midnight blue evening gown that shimmered under the city lights, Angela exuded elegance and power. Yet tonight, she wasn't here as the restaurant's owner. Tonight, she was simply a patron, blending into the world she had carefully cultivated. The maitre d', a tall, neatly groomed man, greeted her with a perfunctory nod as she stepped inside. Angela smiled, her warmth unwavering even as she sensed a flicker of something. Was it surprise? Judgment? In his gaze? "Good evening. I have a reservation under Carter," she said, her voice calm and confident. He hesitated for a moment too long before responding. "Of course. Right this way." The waiter's first impression. Angela's presence didn't go unnoticed. At the far end of the dining room, Ethan Collins, a waiter in his mid-40s, caught sight of her as she was escorted to her table. His lips tightened, and his chest swelled with a quiet disdain. Ethan had worked here for years, and in his mind, the clientele of the Elysian Table belonged to a certain pedigree, one that didn't include someone like Angela. "Table 7 is yours tonight," the maitre d' told Ethan, placing a menu in his hands. Ethan glanced at the table and felt a surge of irritation. Her? Why do they even let people like her in here? Reluctantly, he made his way over, forcing a tight, strained smile. The subtle disrespect begins. Angela looked up as Ethan approached, her expression unreadable but kind. "Good evening," she greeted softly. Ethan's response was clipped. "What can I get you to drink?" Angela paused, letting his curt tone settle in the air. "I'll start with a glass of your house red, please." Without a word, Ethan scribbled the order and spun on his heel. Angela observed his retreating figure, the stiffness in his shoulders, the way he avoided making eye contact. It wasn't the first time she'd encountered this kind of attitude, but it still stung. As the night unfolded, Ethan's behavior grew increasingly unprofessional. He took longer than necessary to bring her wine. His tone teetered between cold indifference and passive aggression, and he placed her silverware slightly askew. Unlike the meticulous arrangement at the other tables, Angela noticed it all, but she remained composed, her demeanor betraying none of the growing storm inside her. The cockroach scheme. Behind the scenes, Ethan's irritation boiled over every time he glanced at Angela, sitting there with her regal poise and effortless grace. He felt a gnawing resentment. How could she afford to dine here? She didn't belong. Fueled by his own prejudices, he decided to act. He stormed into the kitchen and grabbed a small plate, his eyes scanning the counters until he spotted what he was looking for. A cockroach. He caught it carefully, placing it onto the plate beside a carefully plated appetizer. With a twisted smile, he muttered under his breath, "Let's see if you still think you belong here after this." The moment of humiliation. Ethan returned to Angela's table, his smirk barely concealed, setting the plate in front of her. He leaned in closer than necessary. "Here you go, a dish befitting the occasion," he sneered, his voice low enough that only Angela could hear. Angela's eyes flicked to the plate. There it was, a cockroach, nestled incongruously amidst the otherwise pristine presentation. She looked up at Ethan, who stood there, his arms crossed, expecting her to recoil, to shout, to cause a scene. But Angela did none of those things. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, her expression calm but piercing. "Interesting presentation," she said evenly. Her voice was as smooth as silk, but her eyes burned with a quiet fire. The surrounding diners hadn't noticed the interaction, and Ethan faltered, unnerved by her composure. I'll get the manager if there's a problem," he stammered, suddenly unsure of himself. "Please do," Angela replied, her voice steady. "I'd like to have a word with them." Angela's poise amid the storm. As Ethan walked away, Angela reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Discreetly, she snapped a photo of the plate and the cockroach. She documented everything, from the smug expression Ethan had worn to the disdain dripping from his words. Every detail would matter. She sat there, her heart pounding, but not from embarrassment. It was anger, not the kind that clouded judgment, but the kind that sharpened focus. Ethan had underestimated her. He had seen her skin, her presence, and made a snap judgment. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. The manager arrives. The manager approached, his expression nervous. Ethan trailed behind him, trying to maintain a mask of indifference. "Good evening, ma'am," the manager began, his tone apologetic. "I understand there's been an issue?" Angela gestured toward the plate. "Your staff thought this would be appropriate to serve me tonight. I'd like an explanation." The manager's face turned pale as his eyes landed on the cockroach. I am so sorry. This is completely unacceptable." Angela held up a hand, silencing him. "I know. And I also know that the issue here isn't just the food. It's the attitude, the prejudice. I saw it the moment I walked in." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his smugness evaporating. A quiet threat. Angela rose from her seat, towering over Ethan despite her smaller stature. Her voice was calm, but it carried a weight that silenced everyone around her. "You made assumptions about me. You thought you could humiliate me, reduce me to the level of that cockroach. But let me make something clear. Your actions tonight will have consequences." She turned to the manager. "You'll be hearing from me soon." As for him, she glanced at Ethan, who now looked genuinely afraid. "He won't be serving anyone else in this restaurant, or any restaurant under my ownership, ever again." With that, Angela walked out, leaving behind a stunned dining room and a waiter whose smug confidence had been replaced by a growing sense of dread. Angela left the restaurant, the city lights reflecting in her eyes as she stepped back into her car. Her hands shook slightly as she clutched the steering wheel. Not from fear, but from the enormity of what had just happened. This wasn't just about one man's cruelty. It was about a system that had allowed people like Ethan to thrive. As her driver pulled away, Angela began crafting her plan for the reckoning to come. This wasn't over, not by a long-shot arrival at the Elysian table. The grand double doors of the Elysian table swung open as Angela Carter entered. Her graceful stride a testament to her quiet confidence. The warm golden lighting illuminated the intricate chandelier hanging overhead, casting soft shadows on the plush interiors. It was a place meant to awe. A sanctuary of sophistication where every guest was treated like royalty, at least. That was the promise. Angela paused, taking in the scene. The hum of polite conversation and the delicate clinking of glasses filled the air. She didn't need the validation of this opulent space. Yet tonight, there was something deeply personal about her visit. She wanted to witness, firsthand, how her restaurant treated its patrons. She had chosen anonymity for a reason, to observe without pretense. The maitre d', although professional, gave her a once-over that lingered a fraction too long. His stiff smile betrayed the faintest hint of discomfort. But Angela, ever composed, let it pass. "Right this way, Ms. Carter," he said, gesturing toward the dining area. As she followed, she felt the occasional glance from diners at nearby tables. They were subtle, the kind of side eyes laced with unspoken assumptions. Angela had long grown accustomed to the quiet undercurrent of judgment in spaces like these. First sparks of conflict. Ethan Collins stood at his station near the bar, idly polishing a glass, when his eyes fell on Angela being seated at table 7. A scowl flickered across his face, and he muttered under his breath. He didn't know her name, but he had already decided what he thought of her: someone out of place. Someone who didn't belong in a restaurant like this. "Hey, Ethan," one of his colleagues called out, nudging him. "Table 7's yours. Better get moving." Ethan sighed heavily, tossing the rag aside. "Figures," he grumbled. "Why do I always get the ones who think they can buy class?" The colleague frowned but said nothing, stepping away to avoid confrontation. Ethan grabbed a menu and made his way toward table 7, his expression hardening with every step. A frosty reception. Angela glanced up as Ethan approached. He didn't smile, didn't greet her with the customary warmth reserved for guests of the Elysian table. Instead, he dropped the menu onto the table with a muted thud. "What can I get you to drink?" he asked, his tone flat, almost dismissive. Angela, maintaining her composure, offered a polite smile. "I'll start with a glass of your house red." Ethan nodded curtly, his pen scratching against the notepad with unnecessary force. Without a word, he turned and left, his departure as abrupt as his arrival. Angela watched him go, her brow furrowing slightly. It wasn't unusual to encounter hostility. But here, in one of her own establishments? It was both infuriating and deeply disappointing. Microaggressions in full view. The subtle slights continued throughout the evening. Ethan was slow to bring her wine, letting her sit uncomfortably long without a drink while other tables were served promptly. When her appetizer arrived, He placed the plate on the edge of the table, forcing Angela to adjust it herself, a small gesture, but one laden with meaning. Angela's patience was remarkable. She refused to rise to the bait, instead observing every detail. Each snub, each delayed service, each dismissive glance was etched into her memory. At one point, Ethan deliberately avoided her gaze as he passed by with a tray of desserts for another table. The couple seated nearby noticed his behavior and exchanged an awkward glance. Their discomfort palpable, yet Angela remained a picture of poise, her calm exterior masking the fire simmering beneath. Ethan's breaking point. Back in the kitchen, Ethan fumed. His irritation had reached a boiling point. To him, Angela represented everything he resented, a symbol of success that defied his narrow worldview. Her elegance and quiet confidence only fueled his bitterness. She's sitting there like she owns the place, he muttered to a fellow waiter, who shifted uncomfortably. Maybe she's just here to enjoy her meal. Ethan, you're reading too much into it, the colleague replied, trying to diffuse the tension. Ethan shook his head, a sneer curling his lips. Nah, people like her think they're better than everyone else. I'll put her in her place. He grabbed a plate and hatched his cruel plan. Spotting the cockroach near the corner of the kitchen, a regrettable oversight by the staff, he trapped it and carefully placed it beside a garnish on the plate. He felt a twisted sense of satisfaction as he prepared to deliver what he believed would be Angela's comeuppance. The moment of cruelty. Ethan approached Angela's table with an exaggerated air of professionalism, the plate balanced delicately in his hand. His smirk was barely concealed as he set the dish in front of her. There you go, he said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. Leaning in slightly, he added in a low voice, something special for someone like you. Angela's eyes flicked to the plate, taking in the grotesque sight of the cockroach nestled among the otherwise pristine dish. The room seemed to hold its breath for a moment, though most diners remained unaware of the drama unfolding at table 7. Ethan stood back, crossing his arms, waiting for her reaction. He expected anger, disgust, perhaps even tears. What he didn't expect was silence. Angela's calm defiance. Angela studied the plate for a moment, her face unreadable. Slowly, she looked up at Ethan, her gaze piercing through him. For the first time that evening, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Interesting, she said softly, her voice as smooth as velvet. Is this your usual standard of service? Or am I a special exception? Ethan faltered. I don't know what you're talking about. He stammered, his earlier confidence wavering. Angela leaned back in her chair, folding her hands in her lap. Well, then, I'd like to speak with the manager. Immediately, Ethan froze. The calm authority in her tone was unnerving, cutting through the smug veneer he had worn all evening. Without another word, he turned and hurried off, his heart pounding, building tension. As Ethan disappeared into the kitchen, Angela reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She snapped a discreet photo of the plate, ensuring the cockroach was clearly visible. Her fingers trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the magnitude of what she was about to set into motion. Around her, the restaurant carried on as if nothing had happened. Diners laughed, waiters bustled, and glasses clinked. Yet at table 7, the air crackled with tension, an invisible spotlight illuminating the injustice that had unfolded. Angela took a slow sip of her wine, the rich flavor a stark contrast to the bitterness of the moment. She wasn't just a patron tonight, she was a witness, a judge, and soon, an executioner. Foreshadowing the storm, the manager arrived moments later, his face etched with concern. Ethan trailed behind him, his earlier bravado replaced with unease. Good evening, ma'am, the manager began, his voice apologetic. I was told there's an issue? Angela gestured toward the plate with a faint smile. Yes, I believe your staff has some unusual culinary choices this evening. Care to explain? The manager's eyes widened as he took in the sight of the cockroach. He turned to Ethan, who looked away, his face pale. Angela said nothing, her silence a blade sharper than any words she could have spoken. The storm was coming, and Ethan, still unaware of the full weight of his actions, was about to be swept away. The elegance of entry. Angela Carter adjusted the shawl draped over her shoulders as she stepped through the grand entrance of the Elysian table. The polished marble floors gleamed under the light of ornate chandeliers, and the soft hum of classical music wrapped around the room like an expensive perfume. To the average observer, Angela's arrival was unremarkable, a beautifully dressed woman entering an upscale restaurant. But to Angela, this evening was more than dinner. It was an unspoken test of the very empire she had built. The maitre d' greeted her, his smile practiced but his eyes revealing something colder. He scanned her, perhaps cataloging her jewelry, her gown, her presence. A flicker of unease darted across his face before he masked it. "Good evening, Ms. Carter," he said. "Your table is ready." Angela nodded graciously. "Thank you." She followed him through the dining room, her heels clicking softly against the floor. Around her, heads turned, not overtly but subtly enough for her to notice. A lingering glance here, a whispered word there. She could feel the questions in their eyes. Who is she? What is she doing here? It was a familiar sensation, one she had faced many times before, and one she had mastered ignoring. The weight of assumptions. Ethan Collins had been leaning against the bar, lazily polishing glasses and keeping half an eye on the patrons. When he saw Angela being led to table 7, his expression darkened. She was stunning, but that didn't matter to Ethan. In his mind, she didn't belong here, not in a restaurant like this. Not in a space reserved for people he considered his kind. "She's mine?" Ethan asked the maitre d', his tone laced with irritation. "Yes," the man replied curtly. "And keep it professional." Ethan rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath as he grabbed a menu. He hated nights like this, nights when he had to serve people who reminded him of everything he despised. He couldn't articulate the root of his bitterness, but it simmered beneath the surface, guiding his every move. The first blow. When Ethan reached Angela's table, she looked up, her expression open and polite. He dropped the menu in front of her without a word, the edges of the leather-bound book slapping against the polished table. Angela's brow lifted slightly. "Good evening," she said, her voice calm and deliberate. Ethan grunted. "What can I get you to drink?" Angela's smile didn't waver. "I'll have a glass of your house red, please." Ethan scribbled on his notepad and turned away without another word. Angela watched him leave, her smile fading as she studied his stiff back. She had spent years in boardrooms, negotiating deals with men who underestimated her, dismissed her, or outright opposed her. She recognized the signs. This was no simple oversight. This was deliberate, a test of patience. The evening unfolded like a slow, simmering storm. Ethan's disrespect was subtle but relentless. He delayed her wine, brought it to the table with an almost careless gesture that threatened to spill the ruby liquid. When he served her appetizer, he placed it at the far edge of the table, forcing her to reach awkwardly to bring it closer. At one point, he passed her table without even glancing her way. Despite her raised hand for attention, Angela's patience was tested, but she refused to show any sign of irritation. Instead, she observed, her sharp mind cataloging every slight, every indignity. Her ability to remain composed under pressure had been honed over decades. Tonight would be no different. Ethan's growing frustration. In the kitchen, Ethan leaned against the counter, seething. He hated how calm she was, how her poised demeanor seemed unshakable despite his efforts. It infuriated him that she didn't rise to his provocations. "She thinks she's so much better than everyone," he muttered to a colleague. The other waiter frowned. "She hasn't done anything to you, Ethan. Just let it go." Ethan sneered. "You don't get it. People like her, they walk in here thinking they own the place. Someone needs to teach her a lesson." The colleague shook his head and walked away, unwilling to be part of whatever scheme Ethan was brewing. The act of cruelty. Ethan's moment came when he spotted the cockroach. It was small, a kitchen pest that had somehow escaped notice during the busy dinner rush. Most staff would have dealt with it discreetly, ensuring no guest ever saw such a thing in a restaurant of this caliber. But Ethan saw an opportunity. Grabbing a clean plate, he carefully placed the cockroach beside the garnish of a dish meant for Angela's table. He smiled to himself as he carried it out, his steps measured, his heart racing with a sick thrill. When he reached Angela's table, he set the plate down with exaggerated care. "Here you go," he said, leaning closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Something extra, just for you." Angela glanced down at the plate, her eyes landing on the cockroach nestled among the food. The world seemed to pause around her. For a moment, she said nothing, her face unreadable, the calm before the storm. Ethan stood back, arms crossed, waiting for the outburst, the indignation, the humiliation he hoped to provoke. But Angela didn't react the way he expected. She looked up at him, her expression calm but piercing. "This is quite the presentation," she said, her tone smooth as silk. Ethan blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "If there's a problem, I can." "Oh, there's no problem," Angela interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. "I'll simply need to speak with the manager. Right now." Her unwavering gaze sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He nodded stiffly and walked away, his confidence beginning to crack. The other staff noticed his pale face as he entered the kitchen. But no one dared to ask what had happened. Angela takes control. As she waited, Angela reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She took a discreet photo of the plate, ensuring the cockroach was clearly visible. She scrolled through her contacts, her fingers pausing over a name, the regional director of her restaurant chain. But she didn't call, not yet. First, she wanted to see how this establishment handled the situation. The manager arrived moments later, his face a mix of concern and confusion. Ethan trailed behind him, his earlier smugness replaced by a growing sense of dread. "Good evening, ma'am," the manager began, his voice careful. "I understand there's been an issue?" Angela gestured to the plate. "Yes. It seems your staff believes this is an appropriate way to serve a guest." The manager's eyes widened as he took in the sight of the cockroach. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He turned to Ethan, who looked anywhere but at Angela. This is unacceptable," the manager stammered. Angela leaned back in her chair, her gaze never leaving Ethan. "Unacceptable doesn't begin to describe it. This goes beyond a simple mistake. It's deliberate, and we both know it." The manager swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. "I assure you, we'll take immediate action." "Oh, I'm counting on it," Angela said, her voice cold and commanding. "Because you're not just dealing with a dissatisfied guest. You're dealing with the owner of this establishment." The manager froze, his face draining of color. Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. Angela rose slowly, her presence towering despite her smaller stature. "And trust me," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I will ensure that what happened tonight will never happen again." With that, Angela turned and walked out, leaving behind a stunned dining room and a waiter whose world had just begun to crumble. The calm before the storm. The night after her unsettling experience at the Elysian table, Angela Carter sat in the private lounge of her penthouse suite. The twinkling city skyline spread out before her. A glass of wine sat untouched on the table beside her, the memory of Ethan's sneer replaying in her mind like a broken record. Angela wasn't angry anymore, she was focused. The sting of his prejudice wasn't just personal. It was a glaring symbol of a deeper rot within the industry she had worked so hard to transform. Angela picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number. "Mr. Daniels," she said when the line connected. "I need a complete personnel file for the staff at the Elysian table tonight." The voice on the other end didn't question her. "Of course, Ms. Carter. Anything else?" Angela paused. "Yes. Schedule a meeting with the restaurant's management team for tomorrow morning. I want every senior staff member present." As she hung up, Angela leaned back in her chair, her gaze sharp and resolute. Ethan's actions weren't going unpunished. But this wasn't just about him. It was about sending a message. The meeting. The following morning, the staff of the Elysian table gathered in the restaurant's sleek, modern conference room. The atmosphere was tense, whispers of uncertainty passing among the employees. They all knew who Angela Carter was now, and her unannounced visit the previous night had left them rattled. Ethan sat near the back, his arms crossed and his face pale. He hadn't slept. The realization that he had humiliated the owner of the restaurant haunted him. His initial defiance had crumbled under the weight of the truth. And now, he felt like a man awaiting his sentencing. Angela entered the room with quiet authority, her presence commanding immediate silence. Dressed in a tailored black suit, she walked to the head of the table, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Behind her was Mr. Daniels, her regional director, who carried a thick folder. "Good morning," Angela began, her voice steady but firm. "I don't like wasting time. So let's get straight to the point. Last night, I visited this establishment to experience it as a guest. What I encountered was unacceptable." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. No one dared to speak. "I built my restaurants on a foundation of excellence, inclusivity, and respect," she continued. "Every patron who walks through our doors deserves to be treated with dignity. Regardless of their background, what I experienced last night was not just a failure of one individual, it was a failure of leadership. The room grew even quieter. Angela's eyes swept over the group, her gaze lingering on Ethan, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Ethan's reckoning. Ethan Collins, Angela said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Ethan's head snapped up, his name called with such precision it felt like a hammer striking a bell. His mouth went dry as Angela's eyes bore into him. You thought I was just another guest, she said, her tone unwavering. You made assumptions about me based on nothing but your own biases. You disrespected me, humiliated me, and served me a plate meant to degrade. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Angela held up a hand, stopping him before he could try. I don't want excuses. I want accountability. What you did wasn't just unprofessional, it was malicious. And it speaks to a larger issue within this team. Angela turned to the manager, who had been sitting frozen, his hands clenched into fists on the table. Mr. Phillips, as the manager of this establishment, it was your responsibility to ensure that your staff upheld the values of this company. You failed to do so. The manager looked like he might sink into the floor. Ms. Carter, enough, Angela said sharply. Ethan's actions were blatant, but your lack of oversight allowed them to happen. You will be placed on probation effective immediately, pending a full review of your leadership practices. Sweeping reforms. Angela turned back to the rest of the room. This isn't just about one night. It's about ensuring that this never happens again. Starting today, every staff member in this restaurant, and across the entire chain, will undergo mandatory training in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Any employee who refuses will no longer have a place in this company. The announcement sent ripples through the room. Angela wasn't simply addressing the problem, she was uprooting it from its core. She had built her empire by demanding excellence, and she would tolerate nothing less now. To those of you who do your jobs with professionalism and respect, Angela added, her voice softening slightly, I thank you. But to those who think prejudice has a place in this company, consider this your final warning. The media firestorm. News of the incident spread quickly. A journalist dining at the restaurant the night of Angela's visit had caught wind of the story and published an article about the confrontation. Soon, social media was ablaze with discussions about racism in the hospitality industry. With Angela Carter at the center of the conversation, Angela didn't shy away from the spotlight. She appeared on morning shows and participated in panel discussions, using the opportunity to speak about the systemic issues plaguing not just restaurants but workplaces across the board. This isn't just about one man's actions, Angela said during an interview. It's about the culture that allows such actions to go unchecked. We all have a responsibility to do better, not just as employers, but as individuals. Her words resonated far and wide. Messages of support flooded her inbox. But there were also voices of dissent, questioning why she had to make such a public example of Ethan. Angela ignored the criticism. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. Ethan's downfall. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself at the center of the backlash. His name and face were plastered across headlines. His actions dissected and condemned by thousands of strangers online. His termination from the Elysian table came swiftly, followed by a formal statement from Angela's company denouncing his behavior. But the consequences didn't end there. Angela's reach extended beyond her own chain. Word spread among other high-end establishments, and Ethan found himself blacklisted from nearly every reputable restaurant in the city. His career in the service industry was effectively over. At first, Ethan was defiant. He blamed Angela, the media, and even his colleagues for his downfall. But as the weeks turned into months, his anger gave way to something else, shame. Alone in his small apartment, his savings dwindling, Ethan began to confront the harsh truth. He had done this to himself. A personal reflection. As the dust settled, Angela returned to her routine, her focus shifting back to expanding her business. But the incident lingered in her mind. It wasn't just a personal victory, it was a reminder of how far society still had to go. One evening, as she reviewed plans for a new restaurant, she received a letter. It was from Ethan. The handwriting was shaky, the tone surprisingly humble. I don't expect forgiveness, the letter read, but I want you to know that I've spent the past few months reflecting on my actions. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I'm taking steps to educate myself and unlearn the prejudices that brought me here. Thank you for holding me accountable. Angela read the letter twice. Her emotions a mixture of surprise and cautious hope. She didn't respond, but she kept the letter, filing it away as a reminder that even the most broken systems and people could change. Angela's actions had created ripples that extended far beyond one restaurant. The changes she implemented weren't just about punishing Ethan, they were about building a better future. One where dignity and respect were the foundation of every interaction. And as Angela prepared for the next chapter in her journey, she knew one thing for certain: justice wasn't just served, it was a dish best shared. The morning of reckoning. The golden morning sun streamed through the windows of the Elysian table, casting light on a room heavy with tension. The staff gathered in the restaurant's private conference room, their faces a mixture of unease and curiosity. Rumors had spread like wildfire since the previous night. Everyone knew Angela Carter had visited the restaurant, but the details of what had transpired were still unclear. Ethan Collins, the center of the storm, sat near the back, his face pale and drawn. He felt like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. Angela entered the room with her usual quiet authority, her presence silencing the hushed murmurs. Dressed in a sleek black suit, she exuded power. Behind her stood Mr. Daniels, her trusted regional director, carrying a thick folder of documents. Angela's expression was unreadable, her steps measured as she walked to the head of the table. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm but with an edge that commanded attention. "I won't waste time with pleasantries. Last night, I visited this restaurant as a guest. What I experienced was unacceptable." Her words hung in the air, each syllable heavy with meaning. Ethan shifted in his chair, his palms damp with sweat. He avoided her gaze, his mind racing with excuses and denials, though he knew none would suffice. A mirror to the truth. Angela's gaze swept across the room, her piercing eyes locking on each staff member in turn. "This restaurant is part of an empire I built from the ground up. An empire founded on respect, excellence, and inclusivity. Every single guest who walks through those doors deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of who they are or what you think of them." She placed her hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. Her voice softened but carried an undeniable steeliness. "But what I encountered last night wasn't just a failure of service. It was a failure of character." The staff exchanged nervous glances. Even those uninvolved felt the weight of her words, the unspoken implications cutting deeper than any accusation. Angela turned her attention to Ethan, who sat frozen in his chair. "Ethan faces the spotlight." "Ethan Collins," Angela said, her voice sharp and precise, like the crack of a whip. The room seemed to shrink around him as every head turned in his direction. His throat tightened, and he felt the walls closing in. "You served me last night," Angela continued, "and your behavior was not only unprofessional but malicious. You disrespected me, humiliated me, and deliberately tried to degrade me." Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but Angela raised a hand, silencing him. "Do not interrupt me. You will have your chance to explain yourself. Though I doubt there's anything you can say to justify your actions." Ethan slumped in his chair, his face pale. He wanted to deny it, to shift the blame, but he knew the evidence was against him. Angela's calm demeanor made her words hit even harder, each one like a hammer driving a nail into the coffin of his career. Revealing the evidence, Angela turned to Mr. Daniels, who opened the folder he was carrying and pulled out a stack of photographs. He placed them on the table, sliding them toward the staff. The images showed the plate Ethan had served Angela, the cockroach clearly visible beside the carefully plated food. Gasps filled the room as the staff saw the proof of Ethan's actions. "This is what I was served," Angela said, her voice steady but tinged with quiet anger. "And when I confronted Ethan, his response wasn't to apologize or correct the mistake. Instead, he doubled down on his disrespect." Ethan's face burned with shame as the photographs circulated. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and escape the judgmental stares of his colleagues. "Consequences begin." Angela straightened, her eyes locked on Ethan. "Effective immediately. You are terminated from your position. Your behavior goes against everything this company stands for, and you are no longer welcome in any establishment under my ownership." Ethan's head snapped up, his face a mask of panic. "Ms. Carter, please, I warned you not to interrupt me," Angela said sharply, her tone cutting through his plea. You had a chance to act with integrity last night, and you chose cruelty instead. There is no place for that in my organization." Turning to the rest of the staff, Angela's voice softened, but her authority remained firm. "Let this be a lesson to everyone. We are in the business of service, not just to the wealthy or the privileged, but to anyone who walks through our doors. If you cannot uphold that standard, you have no place here." A broader call to action. Angela then addressed the manager, Mr. Phillips, who had been sitting stiffly throughout the meeting. "As the manager of this restaurant, it was your responsibility to ensure your staff operated with professionalism and respect. You failed to do so." Phillips opened his mouth to respond, but Angela held up a hand. "You are being placed on probation, effective immediately. During this time, you will undergo leadership training, and your performance will be closely monitored." "I expect better." Phillips nodded, his face etched with shame. "Yes, Ms. Carter, I understand." Angela's attention returned to the staff. "Starting today, every employee across my entire chain will undergo mandatory training in diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is not optional. We are setting a new standard, and I expect each of you to rise to meet it." The room buzzed with tension as her words sank in. Angela's tone left no room for argument. She wasn't just making an example of Ethan, she was laying the groundwork for systemic change. The fallout, the announcement of Ethan's termination and the reforms Angela implemented spread quickly. The media caught wind of the story, and within hours, it was making headlines. Articles highlighted Angela's decisive leadership and her commitment to confronting discrimination in her industry. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself at the center of a storm he couldn't escape. His name and actions were plastered across news outlets and social media. He became a symbol of the consequences of prejudice, facing public condemnation and professional ostracism. Other restaurants in the city blacklisted him, unwilling to risk their reputations by hiring someone so publicly disgraced. Ethan's career in the hospitality industry was effectively over, and he was left grappling with the wreckage of his life. Angela's rising voice. Angela didn't shy away from the spotlight. She used the media attention to shed light on the broader issue of discrimination in the service industry. In interviews and public appearances, she spoke passionately about the importance of accountability and inclusivity. "This isn't just about one man's actions," Angela said during a televised interview. "It's about the culture that allows those actions to go unchecked. Change doesn't happen by ignoring the problem, it happens by confronting it head-on." Her words resonated with millions. Messages of support poured in from around the world, and Angela became a symbol of strength and justice. She leveraged her platform to advocate for systemic change, partnering with organizations to promote diversity training and anti-discrimination initiatives across the industry. The unseen ripples. While Angela moved forward, Ethan's life unraveled further. Alone in his small apartment, he began to reflect on the choices that had led him here. At first, his anger was directed outward, at Angela, the media, the industry. But as the days turned into weeks, a new emotion began to take hold: shame. For the first time, Ethan confronted the prejudice that had poisoned his actions. He began reading about implicit bias, attending local community meetings, and seeking ways to educate himself. It was a slow, painful process, but it was necessary. He knew he couldn't undo the harm he had caused, but he could try to become a better person. Angela's actions sent shockwaves far beyond one restaurant. Her reforms reshaped her empire, creating a legacy built on respect and equality. Ethan's downfall was a stark reminder of the cost of prejudice, while his slow journey toward redemption hinted at the possibility of change. Angela Carter had done more than confront injustice. She had lit a spark of transformation that would burn brightly for years to come, unraveling the night. Angela Carter spent the night replaying the events of the dinner, her emotions oscillating between anger, disappointment, and a profound sense of purpose. The memory of Ethan's sneer and the audacity of his actions were seared into her mind. But this wasn't the first time Angela had encountered prejudice. It was, however, one of the most brazen instances in recent years. Sitting in her home office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, Angela made her decision. This wasn't just about justice for herself. It was about confronting a culture of discrimination that ran deeper than one man's actions. She picked up her phone and called Mr. Daniels, her trusted regional director. We need to have a meeting with the entire staff of the Elysian table. She said, tomorrow morning, everyone, I don't care how inconvenient it is. And bring the personnel files. Daniels didn't hesitate. Understood, Ms. Carter. Angela leaned back in her chair. Her hands steepled in thought. This wasn't just about reprimanding one man. This was about setting a precedent. The staff meeting. The following morning, the staff of the Elysian table gathered in the restaurant's private conference room. A sleek, modern space with glass walls and minimalist decor. The air was heavy with tension. Whispers of speculation buzzing among the employees. No one knew exactly what had happened the previous night, but they knew it wasn't good. Ethan Collins sat near the back, his face pale and drawn. He felt like a man awaiting execution. Every rumor he'd overheard pointed to one conclusion. Angela Carter wasn't just another guest. She was the owner. The realization had hit him like a freight train, and now he was scrambling to figure out how to save himself. The room fell silent as Angela entered, her presence commanding immediate respect. Dressed in a tailored black suit, she moved with quiet authority, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Behind her, Mr. Daniels carried a folder so thick it looked like it held the weight of the world. Angela took her place at the head of the table, her gaze sweeping over the staff. Good morning, she began, her voice calm but steely. Let me get straight to the point. Last night, I visited this restaurant as a guest. What I experienced was not just disappointing, it was disgraceful. The staff exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He felt the room closing in around him. Every word Angela spoke tightening the noose. The unveiling. Angela gestured to Mr. Daniels, who opened the folder and began laying out photos on the table. Each image was a damning piece of evidence. The plate Ethan had served her, the cockroach nestled among the food, and the notes Angela had taken during her visit. This is what I was served last night, Angela said, her voice laced with quiet fury. And this is how I was treated by a member of your team. Gasps rippled through the room as the staff saw the evidence. Ethan's face burned with humiliation, his colleagues' shocked whispers cutting through him like knives. Angela turned her gaze to Ethan, her eyes cold and unrelenting. Ethan Collins, she said, her voice slicing through the room like a blade. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He felt as though he were drowning, his excuses and justifications caught in his throat. Finally, he managed to stammer, I didn't mean. Angela raised a hand, silencing him. Do not insult me with lies. Your actions were deliberate. You thought you could humiliate me, degrade me, and get away with it. But you made one critical mistake. You underestimated me. Delivering consequences. Angela straightened, her voice rising with authority. Effective immediately. You are terminated from this establishment and barred from working in any of my restaurants or those affiliated with my company. I will ensure your behavior is documented and shared within this industry so that no other establishment makes the mistake of hiring someone like you. Ethan's face turned ashen, his body trembling. Ms. Carter, please, you had a chance to act with integrity, Angela said, cutting him off. Instead, you chose malice. You thought your prejudice made you superior. All it's done is cost you everything. Ethan sank back in his chair, his head bowed. The silence in the room was deafening, the weight of Angela's words hanging heavy in the air. A call to accountability. Angela's attention shifted to the manager, Mr. Phillips, who had been sitting stiffly, his face pale. Mr. Phillips, you are the leader of this team. It was your responsibility to ensure your staff upheld the values of this company. You failed. Phillips opened his mouth to respond, but Angela's glare stopped him. You are being placed on probation, effective immediately. During this time, you will undergo leadership training and work under close supervision. I expect a full report on how you plan to rebuild trust within this team. Phillips nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Ms. Carter. Understood. Angela turned back to the rest of the staff, her voice softening slightly. To those of you who do your jobs with professionalism and respect, I thank you. But let me make this clear. If you harbor the same prejudices as Ethan, if you think there is any place for discrimination in this establishment, then leave now. There will be no second chances. Implementing change. Angela then outlined her vision for the future. Starting today, Every employee in this restaurant and across my entire chain will undergo mandatory training in diversity, equity, and inclusion. This training isn't optional, and it isn't a formality. It's the foundation of how we operate." The staff listened in silence, the weight of Angela's words sinking in. They understood that this wasn't just about punishing one man. It was about transforming the culture of their workplace. "This is about more than protecting my reputation," Angela continued. "It's about creating a space where everyone, employees and guests alike, feels valued and respected. If you cannot commit to that, you do not belong here." The fallout. The announcement of Ethan's termination and Angela's reforms spread quickly, making headlines within hours. News outlets praised Angela's decisive leadership and her refusal to tolerate discrimination. Social media erupted with support for her actions, with many hailing her as a trailblazer for change in the hospitality industry. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself at the center of a storm he couldn't escape. His name and actions were plastered across headlines, and his reputation was irreparably damaged. Other restaurants in the city blacklisted him, unwilling to risk their reputations by hiring someone so publicly disgraced. At first, Ethan lashed out, blaming Angela, the media, and anyone else he could think of. But as the weeks passed, his anger began to wane, replaced by a gnawing sense of regret. Alone in his small apartment, he started to reflect on the choices that had led him to this point. Angela's rising voice. Angela, meanwhile, used the media attention as a platform to advocate for broader systemic change. In interviews and panel discussions, she spoke passionately about the importance of accountability and the need for industries to confront their biases. "This isn't just about one man's actions," Angela said during a televised interview. "It's about the culture that allows those actions to go unchecked. Change doesn't happen by staying silent. It happens by confronting the problem head-on." Her words resonated far and wide, sparking conversations about racism and discrimination in workplaces around the world. Angela's leadership became a beacon of hope, inspiring others to take action in their own industries. A personal reflection. As the dust began to settle, Angela reflected on the events of the past weeks. She hadn't sought out this battle, but she had fought it nonetheless, and in doing so, she had sparked a ripple effect of change. One evening, she received a letter from Ethan. The handwriting was shaky, the tone contrite. In it, he apologized for his actions and admitted he had begun to confront the prejudices that had fueled his behavior. Angela read the letter twice, her emotions a mixture of surprise and cautious hope. She didn't respond, but she filed the letter away, a reminder that even the most flawed individuals could change if they chose to. And while forgiveness wasn't guaranteed, accountability always was. Angela's actions had reshaped her empire and sent a powerful message to the world. She had turned a moment of personal humiliation into a catalyst for systemic change, proving that justice wasn't just about consequences, it was about building a better future. As Angela prepared for the next chapter, she knew her journey was far from over, but she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The legal storm. Angela Carter sat in her office, the sprawling city skyline stretching out before her. Her legal team had just left, leaving her with a folder detailing the next steps in her case against Ethan Collins. For Angela, this wasn't about financial compensation, it was about setting a precedent. The lawsuit she filed, alleging defamation, emotional distress, and professional misconduct, was a clear signal to everyone watching. Actions had consequences. The media followed the case obsessively, dissecting every detail. Angela's name became synonymous with accountability, her calm yet firm demeanor in interviews drawing admiration from millions. In court, her legal team laid out the facts with meticulous precision, presenting evidence of Ethan's behavior and its impact not just on her but on the integrity of her business. Ethan, unrepresented and floundering, was no match for the case against him. He attempted to justify his actions, blaming stress and personal struggles. But the judge wasn't swayed. The ruling was swift. Ethan was found liable and ordered to pay a substantial fine for his actions. While the financial penalty was crippling for him, it was the public nature of the case that delivered the most lasting blow. The industry blacklist. As word of the lawsuit spread, other restaurants and hospitality establishments across the city quietly took note. Angela's influence extended far beyond her chain of restaurants, and Ethan's name became a warning. Offers of employment evaporated before they could materialize. Even smaller establishments, which might have overlooked his past, hesitated, fearful of the public backlash that could follow hiring him. Ethan's reputation became a cautionary tale in the industry. Whispered in training sessions and staff meetings, "Do not let prejudice destroy you like it destroyed him." The ripple effect. While Ethan faced his reckoning, Angela focused on implementing sweeping reforms across her empire. The diversity, equity, and inclusion training sessions she had mandated were rolled out at every location. Employees from all levels, dishwashers to executives, attended the sessions, which were led by top-tier educators and designed to confront unconscious bias and foster inclusivity. Angela personally attended the first session at the elision table, sitting quietly among her employees as they listened to stories of discrimination and resilience. The sessions were emotional, sometimes uncomfortable, but deeply transformative. Angela watched as her staff grappled with their own biases, their eyes opening to experiences they'd never considered. One employee, a young hostess named Clara, approached Angela after the session with tears in her eyes. "Ms. Carter," she said, her voice trembling, "I just want to thank you. I didn't realize how much I had been contributing to a culture that excluded others. This has changed the way I see everything." Angela placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. "It's never too late to learn," she said softly. "What matters is what you do moving forward." Ethan's fall into isolation. For Ethan, life had become unrecognizable. The termination from the elision table had left him jobless, and the public fallout from the lawsuit made finding new employment nearly impossible. His savings dwindled, and he was forced to move out of his modest apartment into a smaller, dingier space on the outskirts of the city. At first, Ethan's anger consumed him. He blamed Angela for his downfall, replaying the events of that fateful night with bitterness. He lashed out online, writing anonymous posts criticizing her and calling her actions vindictive. But the responses were brutal, with commenters reminding him that he had brought this upon himself. The weight of his actions finally began to sink in. Late one night, as Ethan sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, he found himself scrolling through articles about Angela's rise to success. He read about her struggles as a black woman in a predominantly white industry, the systemic racism she had faced, and the resilience that had carried her to the top. For the first time, he felt a pang of shame, not just for what he had done, but for the man he had allowed himself to become. A letter of apology. After weeks of reflection, Ethan decided to write a letter to Angela. He sat at his small kitchen table, the room silent except for the scratch of his pen on paper. The words didn't come easily, but he forced himself to confront the truth. "Dear Ms. Carter," the letter began, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I owe you an apology. My actions that night were inexcusable. I let my own prejudices and frustrations cloud my judgment, and I treated you in a way that no one deserves. I've spent these past months reflecting on what I did and the harm it caused, not just to you, but to myself. I'm trying to unlearn the hate that has been ingrained in me for so long. I'm truly sorry." Ethan mailed the letter, unsure if Angela would even read it. But for him, the act of writing it was a step toward accountability. Angela's reflection. When the letter arrived at Angela's office, she hesitated before opening it. Her assistant had flagged it as being from Ethan Collins, and Angela's initial reaction was to toss it aside. But something compelled her to read it. As she scanned the words, Angela's emotions were conflicted. The apology felt genuine, and she could sense the pain in Ethan's writing. But forgiveness wasn't something she could offer lightly. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk drawer, unsure of what, if anything, she would do with it. Later that evening, Angela reflected on her own journey. She thought about the countless hurdles she had overcome, the moments when people like Ethan had tried to diminish her. But she also thought about the people who had surprised her, those who had grown, changed, and proven that transformation was possible. A new chapter for Angela. Angela's empire continued to thrive, bolstered by the changes she had implemented. The reforms not only improved employee morale but also attracted a new wave of customers who admired her commitment to justice. Her story became a case study in business schools, and she was invited to speak at conferences and universities about leadership and the importance of standing up for what's right. But Angela remained grounded. She continued visiting her restaurants unannounced, always observing, always ensuring that the values she had fought for were upheld. She knew that the battle against prejudice wasn't won in a single day or a single lawsuit. It was a lifelong commitment. Ethan's attempt at redemption. Months later, Angela received an invitation to a community event focused on reconciliation and anti-racism efforts. To her surprise, one of the speakers was Ethan Collins. Curiosity led her to attend, and she watched from the back of the room as Ethan spoke candidly about his mistakes, his prejudices, and his journey toward self-awareness. "I lost everything because of my own ignorance," Ethan said, his voice shaking, "but losing everything forced me to see the truth about myself. I'm not here to ask for sympathy. I'm here to say that change is possible. But it takes work, and it takes accountability." Angela didn't approach him that night, but as she left the event, she felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps, she thought, even the most broken people could find a way to rebuild. Angela's story wasn't just about one woman standing up against prejudice. It was about the power of justice, the importance of accountability, and the potential for redemption. Her actions had set off a chain reaction that transformed not only her restaurants but also the lives of everyone connected to them. In the end, Angela knew that her journey wasn't about punishing the past. It was about building a better future. And as she stood in one of her bustling restaurants, watching her diverse team work seamlessly together, she realized that justice wasn't just served, it was thriving.